Hello and welcome to this session which is looking at research design. This session will be looking at how the major components and providing some advice on how to put together a research methodology for your research projects. No matter what unit you're on at Pearson College, this will give you advice on the structure and some of the things you need to think about when you're putting together a research method. This session actually covers giving you some advice on how to put things together in terms of a research method section on your proposal, and also in your major document, your major piece of work for whatever research module that you're on at Pearson College. So it's quite a generic lecture, but it will take you through the various stages you need to think about for both the proposal and of course the major project that you're going to be submitting. What we will be looking at in this session is giving you an idea of the different layers you need to consider and some advice and techniques in each of those layers and some options you need to look at and make decisions on as part of your research project. So in this lecture we're looking at something called deductive research and inductive research approaches. We'll be looking at research strategies, in other words different methods of actually researching: questionnaires, observation, action research, all those kind of different methods you've probably heard about. And then the last bit we'll be looking at is basically how we're going to record the data, what's our data collection methods. And they're the kind of the layers of the research design phase. Some general advice in terms of when you're putting together your research methods for your projects. The first one is that remember in previous sessions you've been working on putting together a research aim and a set of research objectives, and if you haven't got together your research aim, your research objectives yet, you need to be starting to get these fixed in stone, because they're really important. They're pivotal to what happens in your next section, which is your research design section, your research methods. Remember the way these things are structured, and you might need to go back to some of the recordings on this. We're going to have a research project title, so that's like a title to our research. We're going to have some kind of background, and in that background we're going to have a definition of the practical problem, opportunity or issue. Okay, we're going to justify why that issue is important to that business or to those consumers, or whatever it will be, and we're justifying that through media, business related media such as The Economist, The Times, Mintel, those kind of publications, rather than academic publications. Then, of course, we're going to be looking at the academic work. What's the background to this topic? What's the theories behind it? What do the academics say behind it? And that's the other major bit. That, remember, we talked about something called the literature review there, and we did a major session on that. And then, of course, you're going to develop a research aim, which is a sentence or two, which conceptualizes and really focuses down your research, and so much so that you can get it into a sentence or two. And then you've got these research objectives. And a part of those research objectives is that I'm going to research this, I want to understand that, I want to investigate this. And these research objectives are the ones you're going to have to try and find methods for. You're going to say, right, for the investigating consumer buyer behavior at Argos, I need to find a research method, and it's your choice now, your decision to which research method you're going to do. In the research methods section of your proposal, or the research methods chapter or section within your research project, okay, you need to make sure that the methods you're using, okay, are linked to your objectives. Okay, there's a direct link. So for objective 2, this is the objective. This is the method I'm going to use. So it's a structural thing, really. So make sure you structure things quite well and link them to actually what you're trying to do. Obviously, you're going to have to be detailed when you're writing about your research method and what research methods you're going to use. You have to write them like a set of instructions, okay? So much so that if you gave those instructions or that research method to someone else, they could go and do it from scratch without even talking to you again, okay, once you handed over the paperwork. So very detailed is one of the most important tick boxes you need to do for a research design section in your proposal or in your major project that you're going to be submitting. Now, I agree, in your proposal you've not got many words. Most of you at Pearson College will be doing a proposal and it will be a very small number of words. Okay, fine, I agree, that's a problem, and you're probably worrying about that. But business is ever increasing, trying to limit the amount of words that we're using, and we have to be concise. People are busy, we have to be to the point. So it's trying to force you into that skill and get used to that skill, and it's assessing that skill as well. If you're a marketeer, you have to write fairly concise. If you're using social media, Twitter, you've got about 160 characters. You've got to be concise, but you've got to be concise without losing the meaning, and that's the skill there for the research proposals. So be detailed, link your research methods that you've chosen to your objectives, okay? And the most important thing is justification. Now this is a higher level skill. It's justifying why the research methods you've chosen for your objective or for your topic or for your problem, opportunity or issue that you've already defined. Why is the research method you've chosen appropriate? Why does it work the best compared to others? That's the key there. So be detailed and try to justify as much as possible. When you're looking at the research method section in your proposal or in your major project, you've got 3 layers, okay? 3 major layers you need to make decisions on. The first one is the research approach, which includes some key terms such as inductive and deductive research. You've then got the research strategy or research method, which is things like survey, observation, questionnaires, interviews, those kind of things that we will be looking at. And you've got to make decisions there. And the last one's fairly straightforward, data collection. And that's about how you're going to record the data. Are you sending the questionnaires out through SurveyMonkey, or are you doing on the clipboard in the street? Are you recording interviews with a dictaphone? You know, what's the recording method so you can get this data down accurately, basically. So we're going to be looking through these 3 layers today, and you're going to have to make decisions on these 3 layers and say why the decisions you've made in these layers are the most appropriate. So the first one, the research approach. Okay, now this one, don't get too worried about this one. You just need to really say which approach your project is best suited for. And the 2 approaches we've got are deduction and induction. And I'll take deduction first. Deduction is actually also known as theory testing. So if you've probably heard of hypotheses, this is where we develop our hypotheses and we go and test it. Okay, so it's highly scientific and it can be highly statistical. Okay, so when you are doing the deductive approach, and this is, and I suspect maybe 10%, 15% of you will do this approach, and that's fine. Some of you will like this. Some of you will love this. They love the figures. You love the highly structured nature of it. But what you're doing in the deductive approach is you're actually designing almost scientific experiments, okay, where you have a high degree of structure. You're trying to control everything so nothing affects the experiment, and you probably kind of did this type of work in your GCSE science classes or any form of science classes. So what we're doing in the deductive approach is we're testing. We've got an idea and we're going to test it. And I'll give you some examples of those ideas as we go through. And when we have an idea, we need to put that idea into our hypotheses. And that hypothesis is basically a sentence which is showing that we want to test the effect of one variable on another. And I'll give you an example of this later on. What you're trying to do in the deductive approach is you're trying to prove or disprove whether there is a relationship between one variable or another. Now, what I mean by a relationship between one variable or other is, so for example, if I change the time in which I send my company's promotional emails out from 7 o'clock in the morning to 10 o'clock at night, does it have an impact on the click-through rates? So what we're looking at is, if we've changed something, if we do something different, what would be the impact? And can we actually prove that this impact is scientifically prove that actually it's had an effect, and what degree of an effect has it had? So it gets really statistical here. So if you like that, go for it, not a problem. You'll find when you're reading literature, once you're getting into the literature in your topic, in your area, you'll find if your topic is more deductive or inductive. If it is more deductive, you'll find a lot of figures, a lot of statistical testing, and they're trying to prove something's happening. They're trying to prove something is existing through the numbers that they're collecting. So that's the kind of one we're doing here. They're little tests, they're little experiments. The data you're collecting is mainly figures. so you can put these into software programs to prove that the hypothesis is working or not. It's highly structured. It needs to be highly structured because you basically, as an experiment, you need to control everything so much that nothing will have an effect on what you're looking at, because you want to make sure that if you're just changing the time, it's the time that's having an effect on your emails being sent out and the click-through rates, nothing else, not the weather or something like that. And it's very difficult to control that, so that can be an issue. And when you are doing the deduction approach, it's all to do with statistical analysis. So things like t-test. And t-test is all about trying to prove if there's a relationship between one variable and another. So is time the biggest factor that affects email click-through rates? Okay, and that's the kind of nature of that kind of approach. Now, I'll give you some examples of those hypotheses and how one variable is having an effect on another. Remember that hypotheses in the deductive approach, is a claim. Okay, you think something's happening, and usually that claim comes from your literature or even your problem, your opportunity, or issue. So again, it's a little sentence. So here's my hypotheses, or some examples of them. An increase in spending on radio advertising will increase sales. Again, you can see you've got two variables. You've got A, radio advertising spend, okay, and B, sales figures. Okay, two bits of data, two quantitative bits of data. There's figures in each of them. Okay, and that's what I want to test. If I increase the spending on my radio advertising, will it increase my sales? That's the hypothesis, and that's what I want to test. And that's an example of the deductive approach. It might be another, for example, suggestive selling. Suggestive selling is where a restaurant a waiter or server, waitress will come to you and they'll say, come and take your order. You'll say, I want a coffee, and they'll say, well, would you like fresh ground coffee or would you like instant coffee? The fresh ground is a form of selling up. It's trying to get you to upgrade to the next level. So suggestive selling is trying to basically make you spend more, and banks do it. A lot of people do it. Mobile phone companies do it all the time. Can I increase sales through suggestive selling at Little Chef? I need to prove or disprove, and again, that's the deductive approach. I'm proving or disproving. If something happens, will something else happen? So suggestive selling, if I do that, will it increase my sales? I need to prove that. And the last one here, again, this is the one about sending out emails. What time do I do it? If I change the time, will it affect the number of people that click through the email to my website? And of course, time is one data variable, and of course the click-through rates, the number of people that click through, is also another data variable. So you've got two variables, and once you collect the data on each side of these variables, this is where you do things like t-testing. T-testing is about proving whether if one thing changes, it has an effect on the other. And again, that's the statistical nature of the deductive approach. And if you like that, if you're good at maths, then fantastic. There is software out there such as SPSS software that you can use to help you do that. And there's software on every computer in Excel and stuff to do all this kind of stuff. So, but obviously you have to spend time learning it, making sure you're getting it right. And of course, when we are testing these hypotheses, the whole aim is to actually think about, is this thing have an effect on another? So is there actually a time here when I'm sending out my emails which has a massive effect or some effect on the number of people clicking through to my website? So we're trying to prove a relationship. We're not understanding why it's happening. That's the difference here. Deduction, or the deductive approach, is not about understanding why questions. What it is about is proving that there's a trend. Okay, if this happens, something else happens. If I change this, will this happen? That's the deductive approach. So it's very, very experimental. And of course, to devise the hypotheses, there's two ways to get them. The first way is they are the problem, the opportunity, or the issue that you've described as a practical problem that you want to address as your research project. Some students will take them from the literature. The literature will suggest that actually, but it's not proven, will suggest there's a link between changing this and how it has an impact on that. Okay, that's something you can get from the literature. So you can get from different actual places, but at the end of the day, you have to come up with these hypotheses within in the deductive approach. But it's very important to remember that it's just testing a relationship. It's just trying to work out if there is a trend, but it does not work out why that trend's occurring. So when we look back at, if I spend more money on radio advertising, will it increase my sales? Well, we might prove that more radio advertising and spending more money on radio advertising has an effect. It does increase the sales, but it doesn't say why. We can guess and try to interpret why, but it doesn't say why. And of course, to work that out, we might have to do some more deeper research. And that deeper research, those why questions or understanding questions, is more of the induction or inductive approach. Okay, and about 80% of business degrees are about, and business research is about induction, is about understanding why something happened, why consumers think like this, why managers make these decisions. It tends to be not too much about proving there's a relationship between one variable and the other. And I'm not saying don't do the deductive approach. What I'm saying is the deductive approach, the hypothesis testing approach, is highly structured, and you need to go away and study the procedures, and every textbook that you've been specified for your research methods will give you a good insight into how to design an experiment and how to do hypothesis testing if you feel you want to go that way. However, the choice is yours completely. The induction is about understanding why something's happening, understanding what people think, understanding the emotions they have. It's trying to get under the skin more, and this is where questionnaires and interviews and observational research is much more appropriate to understanding this. So, for example, here's an example of the inductive approach. Why does the time in which an email marketing campaign is sent out affect the click-through rates? Why does that? And of course, to understand that research question, we would have to go and ask the consumers who are clicking through and say, well, why do you click through at 7 o'clock in the morning, or why do you click through at 10 o'clock at night? What's happening in your life that means you are clicking through here? That's what we're trying to understand. So it's the why things. And once we've understand those kind of why questions, we're trying to then make a theory of it. So sometimes the inductive approach is called theory building, because once we go and do the interviews, once we do the observations, once we do the questionnaires, and we get a sense of what's happening, we can try and make a theory from it. And of course, you guys have seen theories all throughout your degree. And of course, a lot of business leaders like Porter, they're coming up with theories that are based on much more of the inductive approach. They've asked people, they've questioned people, they've observed people, and they've come to a conclusion, and they've wrapped that conclusion together in a form of a theory or a model or a framework. And this, sits better with some people, and it's completely up to you, but it all depends on your research topic, and it all depends on your research problem, opportunity, or issue. What's that about? Has your company got a problem with sales, so you want to try and experiment to increase sales? That might be more inductive. Or is the research problem opportunity you've got is trying to understand why sales are a problem? Why aren't consumers buying? And then, of course, you can then try and experiment on how to make sales better. But, one or the other at this stage in your degree. So, again, which one do you think you're going to go for? The inductive approach, again, focuses on trying to gain an understanding, but also trying to gain some meaning and put some meaning to what's happening here. What do we mean by consumers and why they are leaving a certain retailer? What's the meaning of that? Why are they doing it? A lot of it's to do with understanding why, and of course, when you're understanding why, you're trying to generate meaning. You're trying to understanding what's happening. When you are looking inductively at the inductive approach, you are mainly looking at gathering data through qualitative methods. So what do I mean by qualitative? Well, these are words, these are feelings, these are spoken words, these are what people think and say, and in using that data, those interviews, those questionnaires, those observations that you see, you're using that to come to conclusions, and again, understand eventually at the end of your project why something's happened. You're not so concerned with something called generalizability. Generalizability is a term you may read about when you are reading about research method, and it's about basically generalizability is about coming up with a theory that actually is one size fits all. It will apply to everyone. Now, that is hugely difficult, very, very difficult, and I think that's why the inductive approach has become much more prevalent in business research, because not one size doesn't fit all. It's very difficult to have one theory that fits every market. It changes from market to market, or from company to company, from manager to manager. So the inductive approach is much more flexible that way. If you come up with a theory, then fine, but that's a theory for the mobile phone industry. That's where you did the research, or it's a theory for the university sector, because that's where you did the research. It might not necessarily be a theory for every industry in the UK or every industry in the world. Whereas the deductive approach, the hypotheses testing approach, is actually much more trying to come up and understand that this is the trend that will happen everywhere. And of course, that might not be the case. So again, there is weaknesses with these things. And the best thing about induction is that it's flexible, and you can design the approach. It's not so controlled. It's not an experiment. It's not completely rigidly, and in a rigid format of the procedures that you're using. Here, it's much more flexible. You can go and interview someone. You can almost have a kind of semi-conversational chat with them, and that's a form of an interview, which we'll come across that when we look at interviews later on in these recordings. But so it is much more flexible, and actually lends itself a little bit more to business research. I'm not saying don't do the deductive approach, not at all. If you love figures, if you love statistics, you love all that, you're great at maths, you go for it. You come up with your hypotheses and you work out what you need to measure. You go and study the t-test and go and do a t-test, use a bit of software, do it. Don't get me wrong. That's totally fine. It all depends. The approach you're choosing, either deductive, hypothesis testing, or inductive, which is more theory building, understanding why. The one you choose, the research approach you choose, is completely up to you, and it has to just fit with your research topic. So that's what I want you to do. I want you to pause the recording for 10 minutes and just think for a little bit, 10 minutes or so, which one does your research project follow a little bit more? Is it deductive or is it inductive? Are you trying to understand why things are happening, understand what people think and what it's all about, which is inductive? Or are you trying to change something, understand if there's a trend going on, and you're trying to understand if some kind of hypotheses you want to create, you can prove or disprove that. That's the other approach. So spend 10 minutes just thinking about that, which one's your approach, and try to put some ideas why, and link that back. When you're thinking why, go back to your problem, your opportunity or issue, and think, right, this is my problem opportunity. What am I trying to do? Am I trying to prove something's happening? There's a link between X and Y, which is deductive, or am I trying to explain why something's happening or understand why something's happening, which is more inductive? So pause the recording if you wish, spend the time writing notes down, brainstorming, thinking about what we've just covered, and think about what approach you'll be doing in your research project. Okay, moving on. So that was the research approach, inductive or deductive. And don't waste too much time of that in your projects. You don't need to write acres about it. You're talking in your final research submission, you're talking a couple of paragraphs. Okay, in your research proposals, you're talking 2 or 3 sentences. That's it. What is it? Why is it appropriate to your research? Bang, easy peasy. Okay, it seems more complicated compared to what you have to do. However, let's move on. So that's our first research layer. The next step we need to go through, okay, is looking at the research strategy or methods. Some people call it strategies. I just prefer to call them research methods. So when we talk about research methods, we talk about surveys, interviews, observation, all the ways of actually going to do some research. And we'll look at that one now and the different options that we have. Generally, we're just going to go through a range of options. Then we'll do some more in-depth sessions on these individuals as we go through to give you some more insight. But there's nothing stopping you going and read about them now and deciding on what you would like to use. So when we talk about research methods, we've got some general categories here. So we've got these experiments that I talked about, the hypothesis testing that we've been talking about in terms of deductive research. We've got some surveys. We've got some case study research. We've got ethnography. Okay, and then we've got action research. So these are the things we're going to look at. These are things maybe you want to choose. Again, it's completely up to you. All depends on your research project. But this isn't giving you an idea what they're generally about, and then you can go away and read about them and think, yeah, actually action research is definitely really going to be really useful for my project, and this is why. Or I'm going to use a case study approach. This is what you've got to start to think about. So experiments. We've looked at this, okay? Experiments in terms of is mainly a deductive approach. This is where you're devising these hypotheses. Okay, you're trying to work out if there is a trend or a relationship going on, and you come up with these hypotheses. So again, here's our hypotheses. There is a positive relationship between the higher the degree, university fees paid and the degree results. In other words, if a university charges more, they tend to get better degree classification results. So there seems to be a positive relationship. There's a positive correlation. It wants to prove that, and if you pay less in fees, you get poorer results. Is that because they're having to pay the lecturers less or whatever? I don't know. But we're not understanding why that is. We're just understanding if that actually trend is working. And that's what's happening in these experiments, this deductive approach. We need to collect data in terms of statistics, figures. Okay, so here we're looking at all the universities in the country for this hypothesis. We'll be collecting how much they charge for fees. We might focus it down on 1 or 2 degrees, so we might just say for biology, okay, we'll collect all the biology courses in the UK from whichever university, put them in the spreadsheet, we'll get their fees, how much their fees they're charging, and then we'll get maybe their average result for that degree and see if there is a correlation. And of course, what we're doing here is looking at whether there is a correlation, and when we are looking at correlation, we've got something called regression. Again, we're getting into quite statistical methods. If you don't like that, not a problem. You don't have to choose it. This research project is your research project. You can design it how you want. There's no right or wrong answer. You've just got to justify why your research is important. What is it about, and how am I going to research it and prove and almost discuss and prove that the way I'm researching it is the best, and that's justifying why you're using the methods you're using. And these are the kind of methods you can use. Moving on to surveys. Surveys can be deductive and they can be inductive. Remember, deductive is about collecting data and trying to prove a trend. Inductive is about understanding why something's happening. Of course, with a survey, you can actually go and question someone in the street and ask them why they're buying at Argos today and not BHS. But also you can stand in the street and ask them figures. How much did they spend today within Swindon town centre, or compared, and then go and ask people in on the Strand, and how much do they spend on the Strand and in Westminster today, and trying to work out is there a difference in that relationship, and is there more in London or more in Swindon? So again, you're using data, okay, to actually prove that there's a relationship in the deductive approach. However, the majority, 99% of people use surveys, and when I talk about surveys, we're meaning questionnaires and we're meaning interviews. Okay, surveys is the general term for that methodology. And we want to understand why. Generally, people ask them why they're doing this, or what do they think of this, or what's happening here. So we're asking why questions. Of course, when we're asking why questions, we're trying to understand what's going on, okay, and why it's going on. We're obviously that's the kind of inductive approach. So in surveys we can collect both qualitative, what people spoken word, or figures, quantitative. We can also use things like SurveyMonkey. So don't be afraid to use the technology to send out surveys by email, or these whatever you want to do, Facebook. That's not a problem, and we'll address that later, because you need to be able to say how you've sent these things out or how you're going to send these things out. The only thing with surveys a little bit, it is time consuming, especially with things like interviews. With an interview, obviously, you have to go and do an interview. That could be an hour. You've got to get them booked in the diary, especially if it's a manager or something like that. But then, of course, you've got to transcribe the interview. And what I mean by transcribe, you've got to write the interview up word for word, put that in the appendix of your research project. So it can be time consuming. I guess one of the benefits of the deductive approach, collecting the figures, is they're figures. They're easy to use. And the time with that one comes in with learning the statistical processes. So t-test, correlation, all that kind of stuff. Although software will do it, but you need to understand what those tests are. Another thing you can consider is case study. Some of you might be doing case study. A lot of you might be doing case study. Now, a case study is a kind of overarching method. So you could be doing a case study, but you could be doing that with surveys as well. You might be doing a case study, but you might be doing interviews within that case study. A case study is looking at basically one case. Now, a case could be an industry, it could be one organization, it could be a group of consumers. So a case study is basically looking at and trying to understand a single case or a very small number of cases. Usually, we use case studies when we're looking at one company or maybe a couple. Excuse me, maybe a couple of companies in the industry. So, a case study, for example, here's an example here. What went wrong with Blockbuster? The video DVD rental, games rental, high street stores. What went wrong with them? That would be a case study because you're focusing on one organization, one thing. So, many of you might be doing case study approaches, but within your case study approach, you might be using interviews. So here at the Blockbuster, you'll be going to interview ex-managers at Blockbuster to understand what they thought went wrong at Blockbuster and why they couldn't save it. You might be using questionnaires to the staff or to the consumers that used to use Blockbuster to understand what they thought about it. So a case study is basically using one organization to understand what's going on and what really went on at that organization. And like I say, many of you might be using case study, but within a case study approach, you might be having an interview or questionnaire. You might be using other methods. So that's why I say it's like more of an overarching method. Infography is actually like a case study, but it's more social. And what I mean by that is you're trying to understand social scenes. You're trying to understand almost the culture of a group of individuals. Now, a lot of this is used in things like studying Amazon rainforest tribes, understanding how they think, how they feel, and what they do, and how they behave. So this kind of research in business is used to understand, people that groups of people that are maybe slightly different to the rest of society. So skaters, they call skaters tribe, or there is these things called tribes, or people that love tattoos and cover their bodies in tattoos. I'm not saying that one or two tattoos, but I'm talking the whole body in tattoos. There'll be a small group of individuals that do that and love that. There'll be other groups of people that about, skaters, people that love piercings and that kind of stuff, people that are techies, those kind of tribes, modern tribes, they call them neo-tribes actually, that have a certain interest, is understanding how they behave and getting into their world. And that's what ethnography is about. It's joining their world and understanding them, observing them, how they behave and why they behave like that, and what's their culture, what's their rituals, and and some of this you actually see on television. You see these documentaries about lads' holidays to Ibiza. That is a form, a very loose form of infographic research, because it's trying to understand the behaviour of this type of person who shows these traits, why they're doing it, what do they get from it, how they do it, and all this, and that can be very interesting. Not many students use this, but if there is a certain group of consumers that you're particularly interested in, then it's maybe understanding how they work, how they tick, and how they behave, and why they behave like that. And that's what that's about. So it is like a case study research, but you're understanding it's a social case study. You're understanding the social world of a tribe, and you may have to define the tribe, or the tribe might be defined for you within the literature review. You might be reading about these things, but you want to understand how they behave. And the reasons why you want to understand why they behave is because there might be a particular marketing opportunity for them. These kind of surfer types, skatey types, and all those kind of what we call neo-tribes. There may be marketing opportunities, so we need to understand how they tick, and that's what infographic research is about. The next one you might never have heard of, it's called action research. Now, action research is really interesting. Action research is actually also case study research, and case study research, remember, is just focusing on one company or one industry. You're focusing on a very, very small group of things. It's a case study. In case study research, you are basically a researcher who is working. And this is great if you've got a part-time job. You are working in a company and you want to do some research as part of your work. Okay. Now, action research allows you to research the company that you're working at and what's happening there, but also it allows you to research what you're doing. You actually you're researching yourself and you're understanding how you're behaving and what you're doing. It is a research that it's very it's quite unique, and it's used mainly for people that are managers, people who work in situations, and it saves a lot of time actually, because you're actually researching as you're working. You might have a project at work, and you're actually trying to work out something, and that would be action research. So you take part in the research setting, you're working there, and you're researching what's happening in that setting, in that company, but also you're researching what you're doing and how you behave and what you did. And what happens with action research, if you just look at this diagram here, it's quite a structured process. So you're working somewhere. Maybe the aim of the research is to make sure this company grows in terms of sales, and you're there to help with the marketing. So you want to work out what kind of marketing techniques will work. So you kind of create a plan. You work out what the company's working like, what they're doing already, the kind of diagnosing phase. You create a plan of how you think you're going to improve the marketing. You implement that plan, you take in the action, okay, and then once you've done it, you get some results. You work out what the results of that plan were, the evaluating stage, and then you work out actually that it didn't work, and then you put down your thoughts why it didn't work. So, and you keep going round in this cycle of stage after stage. What's happening? Diagnosing. I'm going to put a plan together to try and improve the situation. I'm going to be implementing the plan. I go and implement the plan. I then go and evaluate the results of the plan, see what happened. Okay, something didn't work. I work what out I thought didn't work. I plan again, and you keep going round. So you're researching your actions. You're researching your job. A best good way to put it is your actions, what you planned, what you did, why you did it, and what the results were, what effect it had. And of course, the way to record the data of this is in a journal. Generally, people record things in journal for action research. So very useful. Some of you might think that's very useful, and it's also really rich. And what I mean by really rich is that you're working in a situation, you're getting to understand people, you're understanding people's behaviors, but you're understanding how you're behaving, and also what's working, what's not working. So it does help you gather experience. So it's used a lot for teaching actually. Teachers will make a plan diagnosing that phase before they go into the classroom. They'll plan it out, they'll take action, they'll deliver the lecture or the actual lesson, and then they'll work out how did it work. Maybe ask the students how it works. So it's a form of researching your own practice and action, and coming out of that. But obviously, there's a general aim, there's a general problem that behind the scenes, the company needed to improve its marketing, and I use action research to do it. So because I was helping them do it. So if you like it, then go for it. It might be something. It is quite time consuming. Generally, you need to be working in these companies for a period of time to do some action research, and you're doing work all day. You're going to have to make all your notes all night, or not all night, but a good part of the evening to get your data down. Okay, we've seen some general methods, and we're going to go into some more depth. You'll notice there'll be some more sessions here where there's more detail on observational research, more detail on interviews, more detail. So there'll be individual sessions on the most common research methods that you can use. So this was just getting into the thinking of, right, I've got these three different layers. I've got to choose whether I'm going to go for inductive or deductive, which one suits my research problem, topic, or issue most appropriately, and why. Then I've got this research methods I've got to choose. Am I interviewing? Am I using action research? Am I observing? Am I using surveys? What am I doing? Is it a case study? Then you've got to make some choices there and say why it's appropriate. You can spend 10 minutes now deciding on your methods and what you think is appropriate. You don't need to fix them. Again, there's no right or wrong answer. What you've got to do is link it back to your research problem and topic. What's going to help you achieve your objectives the best? Okay, and that's the important. So if you want to spend 5-10 minutes now, think about your opportunity, think about your issue, think about your topic, think about which method we've been looking at today could help you the best and why. Moving on. Okay, once you've decided on whether it's your research approach, whether it's inductive or deductive, and you've decided on your research strategy or your methods, survey, interview, all this kind of stuff, then the last and probably the most easiest phase is the data collection. Now, it says here about sampling, and I'm going to leave sampling for a bit because there'll be a dedicated session on sampling because it's quite extensive sampling at the moment. So we'll leave that for a second. But what we're looking in terms of data collection is really simple here. I want you to think about, and it's a dead easy. Now you understand what the way you're going to research your research design's about. Then how are you going to record the data? So, example, if you've chosen you're going to use an interview, are you going to use a dictaphone, or are you going to use your iPhone? What is it you're going to be recording it? Where are you going to be recording it? Okay. If you're using action research is about scribbling your notes down as you're doing your job, as you're planning out what you're trying to do and what the results were of it. Are you filming it? Okay. What are you designing a questionnaire? Is that questionnaire going out through SurveyMonkey? So how are you actually going to physically record the data? That's the key here. And again, that's really straightforward. So shouldn't be any problems with this. Just make sure it's it's detailed enough. So if I took your research design and I looked at your research, how you're going to collect the data, I know exactly how you collected the data. I just use an iPhone app, whichever that is. So fine, not a problem. But you need to say how you're going to collect the data and record that data. You might want to spend just a few minutes now just thinking about that, having a little research on the web, how you maybe going to put a questionnaire, the SurveyMonkey or stuff like that, put that together. So don't be afraid about that. So just spend a bit of time thinking about how am I going to record the data. Do I need any equipment? That's the key. Do I need equipment to do that? Do I need a dictaphone? Do I need to learn how to use SurveyMonkey? Again, this is your project. You have to manage yourself, and you need to think about the things that you need to do. If I need to use SurveyMonkey, fine. Do I need to learn how to use a dictaphone? Fine, not a problem. But make sure you plan the time into your research project, because people don't do that, and that's where it all falls apart. So spend a bit of time now, think about how you're going to collect the data, record the data, and then we can finish off. Well, that's the end of the presentation. I hope it was good advice. Remember, when you're putting together your research method chapter, your research method section in your proposal or in your major project, remember the 3 major layers. The first layer is the research approach, either inductive or deductive. You don't need to go mad there. 3 or 4 sentences within your proposal. In your major submission, your research project submission, it could be a paragraph or 2. Nothing much. Don't go mad there. What is more important is the instructions for your research methods, what research methods you're going to use and how you use them, or how you're going to use them for your proposal, and justify why. Why is it the most appropriate research method for your research objectives, okay, and your original problem, opportunity, or issue, and then of course how you're going to collect the data, how you're recording the data, and that's the key. They're the key 3 layers. Once you've got them sorted, you've generally got a good plan of how to go into it, and then you can put together the instructions, who you're interviewing, when you're interviewing, why you're interviewing them, what's the company, why you're interviewing that company. All that detail is really important to make sure it's very instruction-like. Hope it's been useful. There's some more sessions in terms of individual research methods. So if you have picked interviews, then make sure you watch and listen to the interview session. Otherwise, I recommend that you read in any good research methods design book, read up on your methods that you've chosen, and you'll be definitely on your way. Thank you.